this podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Patreon is a monthly subscription that you can cancel anytime, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the handle, the Beirut Banyan. And you can find us on our YouTube channel with the same name, and you can start watching the episodes as they're released. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.
These are good headphones I brought way before when we had money.
Just a few months ago.
That's a few months ago, exactly.
Actually, you know what? That's a good way to start. I'm glad you bring up the headgear before we get into anything else. You look good, my friend.
Thank you, Ronnie.
And now you said it before we started recording that you look maybe a little bit more like a DJ than a researcher.
Yeah.
Both require a lot of skill. Maybe the DJ is a little harder in certain ways. I don't know. You look fantastic. That's all that matters. You're making me up my game. Now I have real competition.
You bring some color to the headphones.
Exactly. I need to get out of black and black. I should go with some more red.
Yes.
You're very kind to stay up late. You're even kinder to do this at AUB late at night. And I'm really thrilled. We spoke just in January, and I know it's just a few months ago, 5-6 months ago, but so much has changed in the last 5 to 6 months that I think it's time we caught up a bit. And I really appreciated your perspective back in January, because in a way you were kind of hinting at certain things that had to be done in the near term, and as far as I know, those things never happened. And I just want to pick it up on where we left off in January, and then we can kind of get up to date with everything that's happening. And I know now, if you want to have a fluid conversation, you might need to do these episodes every day, because things are changing so quickly, and not necessarily for the better. But let's start off where we left off, with the need to organize. And we spent a healthy, maybe 20-30 minutes back in January on that particular issue, the need to organize. And you were forecasting in a way that the fluidity was healthy for the moment, but that long term you needed some structure. And as far as I know, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, there's been no organizing, no structure, at least in the way we talked about it back in January. Taking this people power, if you will, and turning it into real politics, the way we understand it. Do you see that still as a huge component that's missing, or are we beyond that now? In other words, that ship has sailed, and now there's other concerns that are probably, or perhaps more pressing than organization itself. So just your own reflection on that note, the need to organize, and then where we are today.
No, I think it's a good start, and I don't see it actually changing a lot from where we were discussing this last January. Although I know there are attempts to bring in the different revolutionary groups or groups of the uprising together in different fronts. So we notice now there are a couple or maybe more of groupings or an alliance being built between different uprising groups or movements or grassroots movements as well. So this is happening, but it's taking a lot of time. And I think and I don't want to sound a lot of skeptical among my friends and comrades in the uprising groups because I appreciate all the work and everything and the activism and the spirit and everything they've been doing. But I notice there is a crisis among the uprising groups in terms of moving to the political goals and in terms of trying to achieve results as a political movement. Um, Similar to the crisis I see in government and among the political elite in Lebanon in their inability to do any solution or
Mm.
to really tackle the current deep crisis we are in.
Yeah.
I think they're being paralyzed by what's happening. I see similarly a crisis among the new political groups, let's call them this way, that emerged from the uprising in terms of trying to get into political results or outcomes.
Mm.
I don't want to sound like a strategist trying to lecture them. I think a lot of the political groups have a lot of tactics and strategies and ways of doing things. But my main critique here is about the increasingly focus on the means rather than the result.
Can I ask you
Uh,
though? I'm just going to interrupt. What do you mean by that in particular? The means as opposed
I
to
mean,
result.
the means have become the objective in a way rather than means to get to a certain goal. And the goals here are political, tangible results in taking
Oh,
over
I
in
see. So
order to.
so
And the
that
means are the movement,
so in other words, protesting or even the roadblocks. That
exactly.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Exactly,
Mm.
protesting, the roadblocks, the group, the organization, which are all great and fantastic. But sometimes I notice some of the groups, if not most of them, are increasingly looking inward at their own organization and their own, followers and members, and this is fantastic, of course, because you need this organization to get to this level of political maturity
Hmm.
and and the idea is to become political in the sense to have your own program, your own vision, and probably govern. This is what you want to do. I mean, you're not doing this just for the sake of doing it in terms of protesting. So this is what is still missing, I guess, in the work of the new political groups that have emerged from the uprising. But I don't want to be harsh because I'm a member of these groups informally or formally or in
Hmm.
discussion with them, and I understand how difficult it is to break the current political structure in Lebanon. But this is a self-critique and a critique to what's been happening, and the a call for a lot of those groups to come together and think of goals, to think of the need for results. And the critique here, actually, Ronnie, is related to the inability to attract the crowd, the big crowd that we had in October. I mean, it comes. My critique here is coming from the inability of the new political groups, the uprising groups, the revolutionary groups, to attract the bigger crowd. Of course, I don't want to undermine the economic crisis and people's feel of and fear of the future and feel of a survival mode among themselves, among the families, and so on. And that would make them, think twice or shy from going to the streets because they want to care about the basics now. But still, it's a self-critique that we need to up the game in a way to show results in order to get those people to be back on the streets.
Well, okay, I'm going to actually gauge your mind on 2 points here, and I'll get back to the protest movement because I think you just eloquently re-outlined what is missing from the discussion or from even from the from the movement itself. But before getting there, you mentioned something which I found quite interesting, that the regime is struggling too in its own way. And is when you say maybe figuring things out, does that also mean what we've seen in the last 24 hours, that kind of hints at going back to October 16, where, in other
Mm,
words, the previous prime minister is brought
mm,
back in, that you
mm,
kind of have, and for better or worse, you have the protest thing, this October 17 moment, kind of
mm,
shelved and
mm.
going back to politics as usual. Is that what you meant by struggling to figure things out? Or is it something else that they're actually,
That's-
in a way, caught between their own existential issues and the future of the country? And in the background, the resignations and the IMF issues. So, what did you
yeah.
mean by the regime? I was curious about that.
I mean, the crisis is so big, is so deep that those in power, the regime, the government, are unable to come up with any solution for it. The pressures are, of course, indigenous and internal, and also external. I think they're getting it from a lot of the ends, and whether from inside or outside. But it's also a crisis of their own doing. I think it's a crisis because of the corruption, because of elite capture, because of ill management of state assets, and so on. I mean, we know the story. But why I'm saying the regime is in a big crisis,
Yeah.
because they've been they don't have the actual tools as well. They don't have the right tools to manage or to address such deep crisis. They've been throughout the many years of governing, before Taif or after Taif. So not to take the 30-year soundbite. I'm more critical than the 30-year thing. I think before Taif or after Taif, they've been used to just living on the brink of collapse, waiting for a moment, mostly a moment that would happen outside Lebanon, a regional moment, a global moment, if I can say, where they would benefit from it as elites, as political elites, and either reinvent themselves or do cosmetic changes like we did in 2008 in the Doha. So the 2008 agreement was basically a cosmetic change to the Taif agreement, or cosmetic
It was
work.
a bad nose job.
It was quite bad actually, because it led to what it led in later on in 2010 and further, because the last 10 years have been so significant in their negative impact on everything in Lebanon, whether in politics or the economy. But how I see the regime is in crisis. It looks into institutions that into actually ways outside the current institutions. So the parliament is kind of weakened, increasingly weakened. Not the last one, but for the last few terms, the parliament has been weakened, but particularly this time. Recently, the parliament has been doing some exercise around doing the calculations and the accounting and looking into the losses. But basically, the parliament should be the mother of all institutions in terms of discussing this huge crisis we are in and the way out. The cabinet is basically just a place to rubber stamp whatever has been agreed by the big three or four now who are governing it and ruling it. You get the security, the general security, الأمن العام, you get the أمن الدولي, you get the other, to actually be part of the fiscal, financial, and economic policy. I've never seen this before, particularly in let's say quasi-democracies and democracies. I mean, why the head of the Amn al-Am, whose job is to do intelligence, look into the borders, and so on, is part of running how the currency value should be. I mean, that's
can I
again, bringing in the security is just a sign of weakness and a sign of the inability of the political class, the regime in general, actually, of coming up with solutions. But I want to add the last point, which is the frequency of the attack on freedom of speech, on journalists, on people who want to voice their dissent against those in power. We've been seeing a lot of cases recently, and it looks like part of the regime is turning into a police state. And again, this is a sign of weakness and a sign of the decline that we see among those in power.
But okay, let's go with that. And I like that you referenced regional chaos benefiting Lebanese players at home, rather than hurting, benefiting. So it's almost like a reverse of expectations here. But I'm curious about what kind of event they're waiting for, because I'm going to include the IMF negotiations as that kind of waiting for something. Could be money, it could be a lifeline, but from what I've seen is that at least up until now, there's no bet on an IMF deal happening anytime soon. If it does happen, it may happen later, maybe. But it doesn't seem like it's really in the mix now. So that's off the table, or most probably off the table.
All the time.
Regional countries seem to be very, very disinterested in helping Lebanon. Whether it's the usual suspects in the Gulf, or I'm going to maybe flip this on its head, even the countries that are usually heavily invested, and I could even include Iran here, that they're having difficulty paying their expenses in the way they do in Lebanon. So all countries are having that. They're not willing to pitch in, so to speak. So what are the players waiting for in that sense? Doha was a tipping point for internal unrest, and May 2008 was a very, very bad recent stretch in terms of security issues and violence and the brink of war. Is that what you're talking about? That they're waiting for things to reach such a bad state that you're going to end up with something like Doha again? Only because maybe enough parties do not want to see Lebanon completely collapse? I'm curious about what they're betting on exactly, at least in that regional relationship.
It's a very good point. They're betting first on the elections in the U.S. So first they want to see who comes in. If it's Biden, you never know. There's still a few months, but if he wins,
that was by accident. That was by accident. The least complimentary vote for Biden. that was really well said. Yeah, there's still a few months. The bar is so low.
Well,
that's true. It's true.
I'm not going to intervene in U.S. politics.
Yeah. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Hoping they would be reciprocating this.
Yeah, right, exactly. You never know. A few more months.
A few more months. So if it's likely that he wins, there would be not in the next day, I guess, but in a few months, maybe in 2021, a new foreign policy, let's say, or revisiting the current foreign policy, or adding his own flavor with the Obama doctrine, with some of whatever Trump has been doing. Some of it worked, some of it was trial and error in the last few years. So I think there will be something new in terms of foreign policy. And I don't know what would be this foreign policy in terms of the engagement with Iran, engagement with Syria, engagement with the Russians around Syria and in Syria.
But are they waiting for countries to politically get involved?
Yeah. So what I see it here, there will be a new, let's say, chapter of negotiation between Russians and the Americans when it comes to Syria, how they're going to follow on the Caesar's Act, and what would be the future of Assad, and so on. And of course, this would look into as well the role of Iran throughout, from Tehran to Baghdad to Damascus to Beirut. So all of these will become interlinked in some way. I mean, I'm not insinuating in any way that the Lebanon crisis is related to those regional dynamics.
Yeah.
Although it has some link to these regional dynamics, but it's by and large is a domestic failure of policies and practices and lousy politicians for many years we had. So, but still, those politicians in Lebanon want to keep, kicking the can until there's some kind of a major change in these international and regional geopolitics, that they would try to, get something out of it. And this something out of it could be either bringing back 16 October, we're rewinding into 16 October, or a model similar to that 16 October, to what was actually before 17 October. So this is, but again, I'm not sure this is a wise strategy, because I'm not sure the country and society might be able to last until 2021.
Sure.
This is in many ways an attempt to try here and there to calm down communities in Lebanon, the people actually from not taking to the streets, whether through the police action, through this heavy hand on journalists and activists, or through their own political groups, through controlling their own communities as well. I mean, what we've seen in the early first week of June, where members of political parties like Amal, like Hezbollah, actually they controlled their own community from going into the streets.
Yeah.
These are signs that we need to look into that. Some of those in power want to wait for this regional moment where they might actually reinvent themselves and reinvent the system.
With the real risk that no one might care. I mean, there's a real problem in that. At least in 2008, you had players ready to sort of step in. Now I can't imagine that, or it's harder to imagine that sort of this eagerness to, play a role. But maybe maybe because the expectations have reached such a low stage now that even the usual suspects don't really want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And that's a risk of Lebanon completely collapsing in the process.
And I think it's a very possible risk that we might fall into a total meltdown of services, of the economy collapsing fully, of security, even unrest here and there, skirmishes, and so on and so forth. So would that call for regional, international intervention in a way or another? I'm not sure. My guess, this would mostly be around humanitarian support for Lebanese not to fall into total misery and hunger,
right?
And maybe some support to the army and the police in order to maintain a minimum standard of law and order. Sadly, we are in a very, very bad and tough moment in Lebanon. And I don't see waiting for this regional and global geopolitical changes, whatever it would look like in 2021, as a wise and responsible way. We have to wake up and deal with our own issues and our own problems, and really find solutions for them that actually emerge from our own way of solving our problems, actually from getting people who went to the streets, everyone, around a table, virtual table it could be, just to actually those people to give their input. I mean, something, I don't want to divert it to something else, but the best thing about this revolution or uprising, that we got to know beautiful people in Lebanon, or Lebanese who live abroad. They've been contributing without any interest in recognition or financial reward or any other reward. Things we didn't see in Lebanon throughout the last decades. Maybe we've seen them, maybe they were there, but they were not given the opportunity. But the openness of this uprising, its ability to provide opportunity for everyone in economics, in social issues, around community, around political debates that we had, into looking into the constitution, lawyers, and so on and so forth. We have a very vibrant society in Lebanon, or Lebanese were abroad, and we are just sidelining it with lousy policies and lousy decisions and actions by those in power. And this is what we need to wake up and say, let's bring in those assets and make something. And many of those were guests in your show. Many of those people that I'm talking about were actually guests in the show you make, and whether in economics or law or constitution or any other area. Haram. This country is just disintegrating.
I mean, it sounds so negative to agree, but it's the truth. And I will say it. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it any differently than that. That it is a very disappointing moment that we're going through. And you said it quite well. That, I'm actually glad you diverted it to that section about where we left off, not in January, but in October. That euphoria, and then the disillusionment with many things since. And all the people that you're referencing, all the people that are doing this pro bono, They don't have anything to benefit directly from putting all their energy and trying to build something better. Endless conversations around that issue. That the disconnect seems to get worse rather than, it's almost like you have such a talented pool of people that are competent and ready, and then you have the people refusing to budge that seem to be the ultimate obstacle, and they're so well entrenched. Now, in that schism between the aspirations of decent people, whether they're the average citizen on the street, whether they're people in academia or think tanks, wherever, all these people that you and I are referring to, and I think we see eye to eye on this, getting their aspirations into power. What is the stumbling block from the protest movement and transitioning their pain, their anger, their suffering into authority? And I ask you, knowing that elections are not happening, so it's not like it's not like you have something that you can just point at and say, we just need to focus on this and get into power. It's not that. And that the regime is so unwilling to reform, because it would have been a blessing had the protest movement been able to just accomplish that, reform. That would have been a huge step one in the long journey, that players are now held to account in some way, and it doesn't even matter who they are. The fact is, there are people in authority that have to be careful in how they operate. That didn't happen. So what is the stumbling block, or what are the issues at hand? 9 months into a protest movement, a prime minister that emerged is probably on his way out. Probably, he's going to be replaced, probably, by a previous prime minister. Saying all of this probably, but a big probably here. I mean, very big probably.
Or a new face from the same circle.
Could be a friend of the previous prime minister. It could be someone else. But exactly. It's the usual crowd. Yeah. What is it about what is the disconnect exactly? If you were able to dissect the reasons why protests in Lebanon do not amount to political change, what are the core issues that are denying these people from reaching the gates of power?
Yeah. No, this is a PhD thesis question, actually. Someone has to do a PhD on this.
I'll wait 4 years and then ask that person. 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So I don't know if I've told you about the metaphor of the octopus.
No, you told me before you get to the octopus. You told me a fantastic metaphor. The reason why university politics are so petty is that I keep forgetting it word for word. The stakes are so low. The stakes are so low. Exactly. Yeah, that was a great quote. But no, I don't know the octopus.
That's Henry Kissinger.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So when he spent some time in Harvard in between certain positions,
it was harder than foreign policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's harder than negotiating with the Russians or bringing in talking to Hafiz Assad or others.
It's tenure.
But at least we can smile and laugh amid all of this.
Sure,
it's all good. We keep this good spirit. So that I also teach I teach policy in the School of Public Health. So I tend to have some knowledge of biology and basic health and so on. No, that's my interest also in Octopus. These are great creatures. Octopus have 8 arms, and each arm has some kind of an ability to act on its own as well. And they coordinate very well, but the coordination doesn't necessarily come from the head or the brain. That's basic octopus zoology. But if you cut an arm of an octopus, it regenerates.
Oh, really?
So it regenerates, yeah.
Huh.
Because the arm has an ability, like a mini brain, I can put it simply, that it can actually regenerate, and arms can work also in different directions. So the only way to to kill an octopus is you need to actually go into flipping it inside out. So you need actually
Going to the brain,
go to the
to
brain,
the
but
center.
also,
Yeah,
go it inside out.
right.
So you cannot just cut one piece, and because actually it will regenerate.
Huh.
Now, what brings octopus to the Lebanese politics scene?
Well,
you know,
that's a very nice characterization. So, are you saying that there is a sort of a center that's not being affected?
the Lebanese politicians, actually, we have around eight big zaims in Lebanon, eight
Eight legs
arms,
of an octopus. Yeah,
eight arms of the octopus,
that's the name. That's the
and
name of this episode, by the way.
that's
Yeah.
I'm writing something on it, so that's
Oh,
not
good.
complete.
Okay.
And I mean, they're whether the among each of the communities has two or more, but actually they are around eight. Those who
Mm,
really
mm.
been controlling the political scene in Lebanon for the many years, maybe the last 30 or 25 or 30 years, in different formation, sometimes against each other, sometimes together, sometimes in alliance, but always within the scene and controlling it. And the same, game. It's the same playbook. They all play it. Are eight, and those eight work in tandem together. So you cannot just get rid of one in order to feel that you've cut the octopus. The octopus needs to be seen, needs to be went inside into the head and flipped outside out. So you need to. What I'm trying to say here, and not insinuating, and I'll say it directly, you need to dismantle the whole system. You need to dismantle the whole thing, and build something new. Uh, Build something that actually um, can bring the aspiration of the Lebanese people into reality.
But you know what?
And that's
Mhm.
what we couldn't get in the uprising. We
Right.
were hitting only at the arms here and there.
Mm.
Although we mentioned that this slogan of "Kullun yani Kullun" was quite powerful, whether we can debate it or not, we can nuance it or not, it was powerful, but it didn't touch uh, 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 in actually hitting this octopus.
I'm
And
gonna. Yeah.
they've been running the state and its assets and the economy like an octopus. That's the metaphor of the octopus. They have all these different arms and tentacles, and they've been sucking the blood of everyone.
This is such a good metaphor. You're writing a paper on this analogy.
Maybe an
Maybe
op-ed or
an
something, but we
op-ed.
can use it. We can use it in
Yeah.
this episode if you wish.
No, and once it's out, I'll link it to this episode as well because it's an interesting analogy, and I like the way you've showed that you can attack all the legs without killing the body, and the body seems to be secure for the most part. But in that sense, I'm going to just, without naming names, it could just be literally positions, or it could be in the abstract. Is it simply that the protest movement did not reach Ba'abda, that it didn't reach the Speaker of Parliament, didn't reach all areas that you would consider the whatever this thing, the head of the octopus, or is it something different? Is it that the Parliament wasn't stormed, that the Sarai was not sort of taken over? I'm curious what exactly was missing so that the brain of the octopus could eventually cease.
You needed to go into this system, into the sectarian consociational system that has been protecting the corruption and the corrupt practices that we've seen for the last many decades, even in Lebanon. This is the head of it. It's not a party or a group or a zaim or someone. Actually, it's the system itself.
So then,
That
in that case, where would they go? If I were a protester in October and that's the
they should
target,
have, yeah, they should have, gone to all of those places. Whether it's the speaker, whether it's the Abda, whether it's the prime minister, or all other of those eight arms of this.
Yeah.
And I can give them hints who are the eight, but they need to. I mean, it's not about only going there and having a sit-in around their places or their palaces or their residence. It's about targeting those institutions. I mean, the way that
Yeah.
they've been running the state and the economy and the public sector, and that led to this major collapse and major theft that we have in Lebanon. This is what I meant. I mean, the central bank is part of it in many ways, because the central bank has been trying to please everyone in this game, trying to please those arms of those tentacles of the octopus.
Okay, but
So
yeah.
what I'm saying here, that it's about really targeting the different actors in this system that has been controlling the country and capturing the state and capturing the economy.
But I like you said, I think I heard you right. Consociational confessional model is the
Yeah,
source. And
yeah.
that
I mean,
all
the constitutional confessional model, in the way it's been practiced to,
right, right.
yeah,
The
yeah, because
corrupted version of it that
yeah,
whatever came,
exactly,
yeah. But
yeah.
okay, let's say that that is still it's the all, I mean, there's nothing else. Let's say that is the source. One
Mm.
has to go through it. And I just ask you your assumptions as to why it did not happen. Now, my memory goes back to 2000, 2006, 2007. This is sort of the post 2005 protests on both sides. And then a very unpopular president who rides out his illegal extension of his term. And he's untouchable. And he's not untouchable because Lebanese don't want him there necessarily. He's untouchable because the system keeps him there. And it could be something very, I mean, I don't want to be too naive here, but I will say that I think the patriarch was part of the reasons he stuck around. Now that says something, that an entity in the mountains of Lebanon, let's say,
Mm.
is willing to preserve the palace in the east of
Yeah.
Beirut, not for
Mm.
the sake of the embetterment of Lebanon, not because he's
Mm.
doing a fantastic job and he should stay.
Mm.
It's because it's the consociational power sharing thing. And therefore, a very unpopular, perhaps unpopular is being complimentary here, but a very difficult chapter in the presidential term of Lebanon's history
Mm.
is preserved thanks to that.
Mm. Mm.
Are you saying in a way the same thing is happening? It may not be the same players, but it's the same institutions. That the
Yeah.
governor of the central bank is shielded by things beyond his tenure, let's say, or beyond his politics, or beyond his fiscal re-engineering, whatever he did, that
Mm.
maybe the patriarch still has a say. Or for that matter, the presidency, Babda, is protected as a not a presidential thing. It's a religious site as well in that sense.
Mm.
Am I getting it right here that these
Yeah.
are untouchable because the system deems them untouchable?
Yeah, exactly. And in a way, the those protectors of those institutions or of this regime um, are so afraid of touching it, that they would be okay actually if it remains a ruin of a structure, of a system, of a state. The country has the perhaps the largest financial hole in compared to the GDP or to the number of the population size in the world,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah,
And yet we want to keep those who got us into this, and as a matter of fact, they're untouchables and they've been celebrated some way or another. This is insane. This is insane around the accountability and checks and balances that need to exist in the country, regardless of one's sect or background or religion or affiliation. And that's what got us into this. What got us into this miserable state and this disintegration in Lebanon is the fact that many people were untouchable. They were not, put accountable. They were not checked on what they were doing because of this current sectarian and patronage regime that exists and it feeds into each other.
And on the other end,
So
though the groups that are armed are also untouchable for
yeah,
armed reasons, not necessarily. It's as simple as there is a line here that cannot be crossed. Therefore, don't expect us to reform or to change.
yeah, exactly.
But
A lot of untouchables that you end actually without touching this octopus.
so in
You
that
end
case,
only nudging the octopus here and there. This has been the history of the protest movement um, for the past 8 or 10 years.
yeah, yeah,
We only touch on the surface of matters with limited ability to create any change in the system because the octopus is so powerful, it's so clever, it's so strong in reinventing itself or regenerating itself, and we retreat every now and then without creating any change. Now, what's happening now is so big, so major that the octopus is lost. Going back to the octopus, is kind of lost, but it's trying to reinvent itself in a petty way, or waiting for this regional moment. And the petty way
mm,
is recreating, re-oiling the same modus operandi of those eight powerful chiefs in Lebanon. Someone is distributing chicken and grains, another one is distributing money, another one distributing bread, another one distributing eggs. I don't know. I mean, they're just going into re-oiling their machine in this severe crisis we're in, where you want and need and have to show leadership and responsibility.
yeah.
Those eight chieftains, these old chiefs, are going to the what they know best, using a sectarian practice or discourse, or reinventing this sectarian machine that they used to have, whether in the mountain or in Tripoli or in the south or in Kasserwan. Unfortunately, it's the same dirty game that's being played, at the moment. And they master it. They master it. And those who went to the 17 October uprising, they have different playbook. They just play with the big ideas, the change that they dream of. They're clean. They're maybe some of them were violent in terms of breaking some glasses here and there, but by and large, they're coming for a real and they were honest in the change they want. They can't play dirty games like those eight chiefs in Lebanon.
I'm going to ask you a delicate question, and you say as much as you'd like about it. And I don't mean to put the burden on you particularly, but I like the analogy. I like envisioning that octopus, and then I like the legs regenerating. So I'm going to go with this. But again, as much as you'd like to say, do you put the burden on the politicians unwilling to reform, or do you put the burden on the population unwilling to let go of this model? Because it seems like every opportunity to change this model has been it's come and gone. Whether it's mass uprising that happens on occasion for whatever reason, and enough people show up at the same moment, at the same day, they reclaim Martyrs Square and say we want to move on, and Lebanon does not move on. And I mean, we're in 2020 now. I mean, is it 10,000 lira to the dollar today? I mean, it's something around there. Starvation, lines for everything that you would not expect in Lebanon. It's happening. Yet the same population, given a chance, not blaming them, but I'm just curious on: is it really at the end of the day, there aren't enough Lebanese that see the problem this way, that they see it as something different than the octopus, and that the people that envision the octopus, or at least are putting the onus on the brain of the octopus, the system, are they in the minority, or perhaps they're not able to deliver that message properly? Because small population, small country, yet, as you said, biggest ditch in the world, biggest
Mm.
hole, and doesn't add up. So
Mm.
I'm curious if is it the strength of the politicians, or is it the
Mm.
weakness of the, not maybe not weakness, the disconnect in the
Yeah.
population, seeing that this is the problem itself?
Yeah. I think it's both.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
I don't want to put the blame on people, although I've been asking myself and talking to friends and colleagues about what's happening. I mean, why people are not back on the streets? What's the reason? I mean, trying to understand the psychology of the crowd. Why did it just go back? I mean, this is by any standard, I mean, this is immense what's happening in Lebanon.
mm-hmm.
You just have your income, your assets, everything you have
Yeah,
just evaporated. You
yeah.
know, you wake up and you're worth peanuts. Uh, and why people are not taking to the streets again? I mean, just going out. What's this ability to try to adapt? And one explanation is survival. So people are afraid. They're really afraid. And those politicians and groups, political groups, play it very smart in terms of showing that they protect them. Whatever the crisis is, whether it's an attack from an enemy, whether it's the other sectarian group that's trying to come to us, whether it's the some terrorist organization is trying to take our women. I'm translating it from Arabic, so maybe it's not the best
That's
translation.
it works. It works. Yeah.
And and uh, and now it's hunger. It's always the narrative around protecting our community and protecting the ability of those chiefs to protect. Very tribal, very tribal in nature. Its content is very tribal, that there is a chief, and the chief is the only one who can protect you, can protect us as a community. So we have to maintain our allegiance and connection, and be part of this the chief or whatever the group is. And at this moment, people are feeling this. They're so afraid. People are so anxious that they want to clinch themselves or attach themselves to anything that keeps them safe, whether it's a bread, a loaf of bread, or it's 100,000 liras, which is worth nothing now, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So this is what's happening, and we cannot blame them for not going against them. But there is very visible, although not significant yet, uh, um, fractures among in every society and every community in Lebanon. Even those where political groups are so powerful in terms of having a grip on the
Yeah.
community, we're feeling it. People are talking.
But
What
that issue, the cracks within, is that part of the way forward, at least in the way you're describing it? That
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, and
yeah.
this is what you need to look at. This is what you need to build on. And build on in a open and democratic way.
Mm.
Build on for the next elections, if it happens. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but in 2 years' time, if there's election, this is how you want to build your political capital as independent groups or revolutionary groups. You need to go to those and talk to them and walk with them and deal with their anxieties and deal with their fears, and tell them that you can be the uh, uh, al-badil, and I'm not finding the English word. You can actually be replacing those that failed us through their policies or actions or practices.
So even
This is the moment. This is the moment, and this is what I'd like to call everyone in the revolutionary or uprising groups and those emerging political groups. It's time to go and talk to people everywhere. Walk with them, sit with them, understand them, and try to understand why they're not, going into the streets like we did in October. What's making them still think about their Zaim? And this is where you start the change. It's going to be long, long, long journey, but this is how you're going to do it.
So in the best
And
of
I'm doing it myself. I'm
yeah.
talking to people. I'm going into people and listening to them and chatting with them and talking to them. And this is what everyone should do.
But in the best of circumstances, and if it's a grassroots uh, movement, that we have to wait years. Because I'm getting from you that there's two things. There's a needed fundamental change, which you described, and there's also a huge problem right now in that Lebanon is in an emergency state. So it's almost like there's no positive news, at least in the near term. That if there's going to be hope, and you said this before we started recording, that you don't see light at the end of the tunnel. But if we're going to see light one day, it may come later. It's not now. That this is it's a very dark chapter, and we have to wait, unfortunately, for things to improve. I hope I got that right from you, that it's not a near term, there's no near term solution
Okay.
here. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's going to be a very long journey.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to keep our stamina and don't lose hope. We're depressed, of course. We're sad. We have anxieties. We're human beings, but we need to keep going. I think we have a purpose, and we don't want to just leave the country at the moment. I mean, we'll get offers to leave. Many of us, whatever remains of us from the middle class, this diminishing middle class in Lebanon, that I think it's over, it's evaporated actually with whatever happening now. But we need to keep going, and we need to keep this purpose we have to get change in different ways, and particularly through going into people and building these grassroots movement or grassroots mobilization. That's the only way. That's the only way. I know this may sound done in a lot of this training, but this is a real marathon for us, and it's the stamina that counts here, rather than just running it to get easy results. We're not going to get easy results. We're not going to dismantle a 50-year-old system that exists in Lebanon overnight. It's going to take decades, and maybe it's our children and grandchildren, hopefully, that are going to take the fruit of this. But we need to keep going.
I couldn't say it better than that. I know you're not a COVID-19 sort of, I know you're not on TV explaining COVID-19. I'm not going to ask you, even though your biology sort of moment was very, very, very seductive, I'm not going to get you too deep into COVID-19. But as a public health researcher, as somebody who's familiar with, let's say, the inadequacies in Lebanon, in the health sector, I'm going to just gauge your mind on two things. Whether or not, this is more general, whether or not COVID-19 takes the burden in terms of ending the movement prematurely. And that's a sort of just forcing people to go home while things were very, very critical. And the other side of it is Lebanon, I mean, how many public health experts do you have in a country that sort of explain that the hazards are still there? There's no reason to go and celebrate yet. Stay away from these huge gatherings. And then you have a health minister who's dancing, saying we did it in the most reckless way in terms of COVID-19. Okay, good that he had a mask on, but it's not the message you want to send. So is that part of it? In other words, people are forced to go home, and in a way they did very early, because they didn't trust maybe what the state had in mind in terms of stages. They took it on themselves. So there's something there. But then at the end of the day, reform, if it's going to happen, it should happen in all sectors. And here you have a health minister, part of a new regime brought in earlier this year, doing something that sends the wrong signal. So is that part of the octopus, that people are able to, in a way, dance around those 8 legs and find ways of surviving? They're not always, there's no immediate threat all the time. When things get very dire, they retreat, they hide in a way from the octopus. But they never are able to kind of get rid of it. That they live with it, if that makes sense. And they laugh at it sometimes. They
Mm.
complain about it, but they also know how to live with it in the
With it.
room. Yeah.
No, absolutely. The of course, in the COVID-19, when the pandemic was spread and the fear of outbreaks was all over the world, of course, everyone took the responsibility to confine themselves at home. And this is what we all did in Beirut, in Lebanon. And that was a moment when the uprising was gaining momentum to really very, very, interesting levels
Yeah.
of mobilization, of discussions around the future of Lebanon on different, in the economy, on society, on the constitution, and so on.
And people were
And
protesting and protesting into February. It's not like people went,
exactly,
yeah, yeah,
exactly. But then there's a real risk that people might catch the virus, and that would be catastrophic. And no one was aware of what's happening. It was all over the news. So
yeah.
COVID-19 very much came in um, as a gift to the government and
Mm,
to the
mm,
regime. To many regimes in the world, by the way,
yeah,
particularly the authoritarian ones.
yeah,
Some of them uh, managed to polish their images and their around it. Others failed miserably.
yeah,
But it was a gift to some of those regimes and some of those governments, and in Lebanon it was. So, and as you put it so rightly, people don't trust the government or the state too much in Lebanon. They just went on their own. And I know from the uprising groups, they were very responsible uh, not to call for any demonstration, fearing that there
yeah,
might be risk.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
mean, and people were more responsible than anyone else.
yeah,
But then it comes the use of the COVID-19 on attacking on liberty, on freedom of protesting, even if you want to put all the protective measures. So it was used time and again by the government to, um, be harsh on any potential for demonstration or protesting,
mm,
taking the excuse of COVID-19 and the measures of the mobilization that they put in place. And then comes the minister contradicting all of this together. So they used it, and they used the fear among people of catching the virus in so successful way that actually all the protest movement dispersed and became inactive. So yes, that was a major moment, unfortunately, that affected the protest movement. Now the minister dancing, he suddenly moved from being a public health leader into being a Baalbeki potential candidate to the next parliamentary elections. And you have to play the game of dancing and dabki and enjoying being carried on the shoulders of his fans. Um, yeah, I mean, to give credit, the credit goes to the Ministry of Health, to its technical staff, to the doctors and
yeah,
professionals,
right.
and some of them are my colleagues and others are my students who did this great job at least at the beginning and until now in
Yes.
being able to limit the spread of the virus and the pandemic or the epidemic. They did a great job, and the hospital, the public hospital, and its leadership and the way it's been managed contributed significantly also to providing great care. It's not the politician, it's not the minister, and we need to make and always make this distinction between the public sector and whatever remains of it
Yeah,
and the politicians and those controlling it and
completely.
controlling the regime.
Yeah,
And suddenly, Lebanese discovered that we have a general hospital in Beirut and other hospitals that were left in Akkar or in Biqa or in
yeah,
Nabati or in Kisrwain. Suddenly we discovered them and said we have public hospitals in this country. Yes, we have, but it was totally left because those in power, those in the regime, those 8 chiefs, the octopus itself, wanted it to be this way because they don't want to have decent um, public services that are entitled to us regardless of their contribution, regardless of their intervention, or regardless of their patronage. this is my right to go to this public hospital or to the public school or to the Lebanese university. But sadly, they were attempting to kill them. But in health in particular, because the technical know-how is high in Lebanon, because those people who were running the public health ministry or the different departments or hospitals, many of them are well trained. They did a good job. That's about it. It has nothing to
Completely.
do with
Yeah.
the government, or I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they will not like this, but anyway, that's their own feeling of not liking it. But it's actually those technical doctors
Yes.
and technical staff and professionals who managed to do a good job in Lebanon.
It's actually a very good reminder that there are very well-intentioned people in the Lebanese state. They may not be able to express themselves the way they'd like. They may not even be able to hold certain people to account even within their ministries, but it doesn't matter. They're trying, and at times this kind of this true, I think it's patriotism, this belief in serving and all that, it shows. And COVID-19 is one example. And
Yeah.
I want to just echo something you said of the dance and all that. I think there's something very good that happened, is that politicians are not celebrities anymore in Lebanon. They're not given the limelight the way they used to. They're not treated like they deserve a red carpet, fashion TV-like system. Instead, they're a bit afraid, a bit. They may not have lost authority per se. They may be still entrenched. They may be betting on years to come of this situation persisting. But the fact is, the population is trying, at least, in many ways, to hold the octopus to account. And I think that's really, I mean, the grassroots analogy, I hope I live long enough to see something new. It would be lovely to live long enough to see the page turned in Lebanon. I'd like to live in that Lebanon. But as you said, it might take time, and we're in a very difficult stage. But you know what? Octopuses taste good. So maybe it's time we start eating the octopus. I mean, it's delicious cuisine. It's a bit expensive, but it tastes good. It tastes good.
I like this. I think we have a big octopus to kill in Lebanon.
I mean, I don't know if that's the way to do it. I mean, it's a very morbid analogy where you start having to chew on the system. But I mean, it's a good analogy. I'm glad you brought it up. And Nasser, I took too much of your time. I hope we can keep this conversation going. And maybe next time we speak, there'll be some room for hope in certain sectors. I'm really happy to say a few things. I got to know you as the interim director of IFI. I'm doing this episode. I think it's 2 months before, is it in September that Joseph Bahoud takes over? Okay. So I feel honored to have met you in your capacity at IFI, and I hope we can keep doing this in whatever capacity you're in later. And I'm glad you're staying at AUB. I always consider AUB home as well, and I look forward to seeing you there sometime soon.
We'll see you soon, inshallah, Roy.
And good headset. I'm changing mine. I'll get something.
All
right.
We'll get you one from any market that has it in Beirut. You never know.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, yeah. Listen, you get me one, I'll wear it.
Yeah.
Nasser, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening, and a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.